Yeah, there we are.
There we are, and we're recording as well. So
Okay.
I will just leave you, and I'll see you in about an hour or so.
Yeah, I'll do my best to make sure it's 8:30.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no worries, that's all right. Right, enjoy it, see you in a bit.
Thank you. Okay, we're on the home run now, number 5, and I think I'm going to finish off looking at the architectural question, what makes, in my view, what makes Weston unique, and how what we're trying to do now with regenerating bits of the town, emphasise the quality that adds up to Weston. Weston is quite unique, and it's very. I've got a meeting tomorrow with Arts Council England, and we've had Historic England down to Weston. When Historic England came 2 years ago to look at Weston, their assessors hadn't been here before, and it was idyllic. The weather was like this. The tide was in. I mean, absolutely everything was spot on. And they arrived here, and it was a 2-day session, so they were staying overnight, actually there. And they walked around and said, "This is superb. This place really has something going for it." And I think perhaps those of us who live here, and those who have lived here for over 100 years, they get a bit jaundiced, and they don't see the quality that's actually in front of their eyes. So I thought we'd finish off with looking at a touch of quality. And to do that, we've really got to concentrate on the one man who I think more than anybody else has given Weston its visual identity, and that is Hans Fowler Price, the great architect of Weston. Not a national architect, but somebody who stamped his design on Weston-super-Mare. Born in Langford, so just down the road, he potted off to Liverpool, where he was articled to Thomas Barry, and in those days when you had to pay for your articles to go into a profession. And Barry, up in Liverpool, he was, I say that, a quirky architect. So he wasn't just drawing the same old things that everybody else drew because they were in the pattern book. He had his own ideas. And so I think Price, as a student, took over that quirky approach to life, as often people do when they've had inspiring teachers. It was a period where English architects were beginning to look back to the medieval period to get their inspiration. Not necessarily just to copy medievalism, but to get some inspiration from that era. We'd come through the classical Georgian period where everything was sort of nice and even and well balanced, back to something which was freer. Almost in a way, I think, trying to escape from the rigidity of making sure buildings were symmetrical. It's a bit like now, well, all generations look on previous generations, and heck, let's rebel against it and have something different. It was also a period of the Oxford movement, which to most people nowadays means absolutely nothing, other than in the church, and by then it was the Church of England, the established church. There was a move away from the simplicity of worship into something which was a little more flamboyant, again, a little more medieval, the rise or the rebirth of smells and bells rather than tub-thumping sermons. Tractarianism, same sort of thing. And new church architecture was definitely Gothic. Gothic was in, Gothic was God. Out with the awful classical was Republican and from ancient Rome, and it was nothing to do with Christianity. And so architecture took on all of these philosophical points. And Hans Fowler Price, like many good leaders in their fields, just happened to be born at the right time. So he fitted in with what was then becoming the mode. Spent most of his time here, did some work in Bristol, some work in Clevedon, but by and large most of his work was in Weston-super-Mare, and this is where he died, 1912, and he's buried up in Milton Road Cemetery. So there's the old boy, a wonderful man. Now, to show his commitment to Weston, he was a town commissioner. You remember from the previous lecture, the early days of the council. He had the right connections. Now, of course, if you were going to be anyone in the 19th century, it was necessary to have the right connections. It doesn't mean quite the same nowadays, but it certainly did then. He also had great business acumen. I mean, he was no romantic fool. He was a romantic, but his head was a great mathematician. He could work things out to the nth degree. He also had religious and philosophical convictions about the purpose of architecture. This was the time of the seven pillars of wisdom, the period of thinking that architecture was a godly art, and therefore he was going to pursue that. He was a temperance man. I mean, today we might go on and on about youths being drunk in Regent Street. Compared with the 19th century, this is absolutely nothing. I mean, they're all teetotals. They just have the occasional binge. But then there was a real problem with alcohol, and so he became a committed temperance person. He was modest in habit, but his designs were flamboyant, which is an interesting juxtaposition. He was this sober man designing these incredibly flamboyant buildings. He also happened to be at the right time. The town was expanding. There was national prosperity and a demand for building. So to be an architect then, with a lot of money floating around, a lot of people being born, great demand for architecture, hey ho, he's in the right place at the right time. Vitality of mind, stamina. He worked right until he died. He was what we would now call a workaholic, and insisted that everyone who was with him did the same. He had this incredible loyalty to Weston. He had vision, but it was his tone. Nowadays you often find professionals come in, they do their stint for 5 years and then go off somewhere else. They have no loyalty to the place in which they live. They have no emotional link, where he had that. And he also was a great judge of competence. So he surrounded himself with equally competent assistants. People like William Wooler, from whom we get Wooler Road, Sidney Wilde and William Jane. And the firm in the end, after he died, became Coffin, Jones and Roden, and that carried on right up until the 1980s, and the firm eventually disappeared. So, right time, right connections, and the most able man. So his name, more than anybody else's, is stamped on the architecture of Weston. Even in death. I mean, number 7 Trewartha Park, this one, he designed. This is the very end of his career. He's moving into this Edwardian style rather than the over fussy Victorian. The house is called Vaughan, that's the name. But I bet the people here don't realise he designed these. This is where he died, and so he was fittingly buried across the garden wall in Milton Road Cemetery, which is just the other side. So he starts off with ecclesiastical architecture in Weston. The Walham Street Baptist Church, the very first Baptist church to be built in Weston in 1850, he reorders it in 1862. He didn't build it, but he certainly changed it. And this was he was a person, even though he was an Anglican, his understanding of different strands of religion was sound, so he could design churches for the client. He didn't have any qualms about it. I don't think he designed any Catholic churches, but he certainly designed non-conformist as well as Anglican churches. And this is the inside of Walham Street Baptist Church, typical Baptist church of its time, plain seating, plain idea, galleries, organ, pulpit in the worship the word position, because that's where the minister is doing top thumping. Plus, of course, the baptistry underneath, because Baptists believed in full immersion, and so the lid could come off. You could be baptised by being in the water, like the Jordan, and immersed in it. And so that was his design. Simple, but that's what the client wanted. And this is what it became just before it closed as a place of worship. More simplified. I always remember when I was a boy at the grammar school, we had to go to one of our annual services there. And I remember thinking I'd come into a cinema because the seats were cinema seats. And every time you stood up, the seat came up. So all we boys used to keep standing up, boing, the seats came up. But there is it. And that, of course, when the Baptists moved out, it was acquired by the Civic Society and then the Town Council, and today it's the Blakehay Theatre. And you can see here where the baptistry is, that's the stage. So what we have there is a conversion from Price's church into a modern 100+ seater theatre in the round. So it's almost as you would design an intimate theatre today, and yet there it was, Hans Price's building as a church, and the seating has now been raked, of course, so that you can actually look down on the stage. It was bombed in a war. In fact, it was bombed twice and rebuilt. This is when the other part of Bottom Street was also lost. This rather nice sweep of brick buildings that's since gone. And this is the place today, rebuilt, and it's now the Blakehay Theatre. Very eccentric building in a way. You see detail, even though the Baptist religion was straightforward and uncomplicated by ceremony, the buildings still have their sort of ceremonial bits. And here they were looking back to classical times and putting in these pilasters and pillars. Pillars are the rounding, pilasters are where they're just sort of cemented onto the wall in this Corinthian style with the florid leaves. Interesting use of the stone as well. This starting to use this pink stone, the pink Carboniferous limestone. There are lines of it going through Western, certainly through the cemetery. So wherever you see houses built of pink limestone rather than the grey Carboniferous limestone, that has been quarried locally on Worldby Hill. And that's been used there, interspersed, of course, with the Bath stone, the Ulitic limestone, which is easily carved, as opposed to this hard stuff, which isn't at all easily carved. And just look at this detailing. And it's the sort of thing, we could do it today, but it would cost us. And so we don't do it. We haven't lost the skill, but we've lost the wherewithal, and we've lost we've lost the cash. We can't afford to do it. But if we wanted to, it could be done. But a wonderful, wonderful detailing. His second church then, another Baptist church, Bristol Road Baptist Church. I think I've shown this before, just up the road, which always amuses me because it has that minaret feel to it, doesn't it? There's something a bit Islamic about it. This is where the call to prayer should be bellowing out through loudspeakers every morning to Weston-super-Mare. It just doesn't look like a Baptist conventicle. And heaving with all these gargoyles and nasty beasts. It's, again, for a sect which is supposed to be straightforward, I always find these detailings slightly out of place but amusing nonetheless. Again, wonderful pink limestone there. And in this early English style, it's very pointed style. Hans Fowler Price, he was eclectic. He could tie his hand to any particular style, and providing it was vaguely Gothic. A great thing about Victorian Gothicism is that it could be vaguely Gothic. So long as it had a point, an arch, it was okay. Inside, again, the emphasis of the word as opposed to the sacrament. The word is the pulpit, the sacrament is the altar. So you see that difference, which today people somewhat, but it was very important to the way people thought then. So here you have this wonderful sort of 3-decker pulpit. So from here with the sounding board above it, in the days before we had PA systems, the sounding board there made your voice clear. And when you think of people like John Wesley and Charles Wesley, being able to preach to several thousand people in the open air, nowadays most people can't speak in a hall with 20 people in without some sort of microphone. Amazing. He then went on to build a Methodist church in the Boulevard, 1876, which lasted until 1955, and it's now a shop. Well, it's an estate agency, isn't it? The junction of Orchard Street and the boulevard. So that's it today, that's it then, and you can see they've kept sort of that Gothic window, they've kept the roof stone, but they've rather messed up all the rest, which could have been treated more sympathetically. But there we are. And I bet 9 out of 10 people walking past wouldn't even see that it had a former use. Unfortunately, we all know most people walk along with tunnel vision, don't they? They look like that, never look up, never look around, wouldn't even notice the roof line, they just look through there. He also designed the Gospel Hall for the Plymouth Brethren. This was a more exclusive sect. You were either in the Brethren, or you were just not considered to be, you were beyond the pale. So it was exclusive. But again, they wanted a particularly simple classical design. So instead of the pointed arches of spiky Anglicanism, it's a rather old-fashioned, classical, straightforward design. It's unfortunately, but in terms of architecture, this is hideously inappropriate and detracts from the building itself. But there we are. He was church warden at Christ Church, so he was an Anglican, and Christ Church in Montpellier, he church warden for half a century. He didn't build the church, but he raised it. He put it up a story, so the middle bit, you can't see it from this photograph, higher up, so there are windows up there which bring light in, making the building somewhat lighter. He also extended it this way. And that's the church which currently is covered in scaffolding. That's the repairing it. And it always amuses me, the scaffolding company is known as Easy Access. They've got this big sign saying, I'm sorry, but the access is anything but easy. It's all that scaffolding, there's some irony there. And unusual for Somerset as well, in that it has a spire. Somerset is a county of towers. But hey ho, the Victorian time, let's have a spire. It's a broached spire, so it has this sort of funny bit, and then the spire comes up there. And inside, it was built by a company called Manners and Gill. They were from Bath. They also built Emmanuel Church. They did a lot of Somerset and Bristol and Bath church work. But Hans Price, he built the chancel, which is that bit up beyond this is the nave, that's the chancel, and the clerestory, like a clear story. So you push it up a bit, and that brings, remember the days before electric light, you needed to open it up to get the light in. The English way of designing churches was you had the central nave which went up, and then the side aisles which were on the side. The German hall principle was that the side aisles were the same height as the central nave. And the very few buildings in England were like that. Central nave goes up and the others a bit lower. Except going to Bristol Cathedral and the Victorian extension there, the side aisles are the same height as the central nave. And that's built on the German hall principle. But it brings this light in from up above. So Price raised it to bring light in. 1890. So we're getting on to the end of the 19th century now. Remember, he was dead in the first decade, or towards the end of the first decade of the 20th century. St John the Baptist, the parish church, it wasn't large enough, even though they had rebuilt it. So Price added this south aisle. It's rather odd. I mean, they are huge windows, but you just don't appreciate it. If you go inside, there are galleries, and the galleries, of course, are across here, so you don't appreciate these enormous windows. The only window you can really appreciate in St John's is the Great East window, because there's nothing blocking it. But it's a strange building. But 1890, along with his colleague Wooler, one of the things we do, we tend to call everything by the name of Price, and we forget that his associates was equally competent as he was, but their names are often just sidelined, which is a bit unfortunate. Now, one of his other assistants, Sidney Wilde, whose father had been the medical officer of health in Weston, he designed St Saviour's in Locking Road. Now, this is entering the world of fantasy, because they're beginning to design churches on the scale of cathedrals, far too large. I mean, these are designed to take nearly 1,000 people. What they didn't realise was that congregations were going to wane. Well, who can predict the future? It's much easier to be an historian and look at the past. I think I might have mentioned before, the general rule of thumb, though they weren't in it at the time, was that if a church hadn't been completed by the First World War, it was unlikely that it would be finished, because the impact of the war on the way men thought was such that they'd seen too much across in Flanders. They weren't simply going back to church because their betters told them to go to church. And so St Saviour's ended up minus 1, 2, 3, so it finished there, minus that, minus this, and it became a very truncated church. So that's what it would have been had Sydney Wiles planned. This is what it did become, and this was the temporary West Wall, which became the permanent West Wall, until the church itself was closed a few years ago and turned into flats. This is the inside of it. Difficult to imagine that is now a block of flats. But you can see again, it's built in that it is meant to. It's not only meant to impress you when you go in, but it's meant to overawe you. So that you go in, you're not in a nice, cosy little country church. You're in something that's a wow. I feel inferior in this great edifice, and so that's the way it was designed, and that's it now. Okay, a block of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories of flats. Interesting. I mean, whether you like it or not is not generally the issue, but it was either converted into flats or put it down. So, and of course, the idea of the boulevard, as I've said before, because John Hugh Smith-Pigott, Lord of the Manor, was a Francophile, the whole idea that the boulevard should be laid out as a Parisian street. And all Parisian boulevards have two viewpoints. And this had the viewpoint of Christchurch with that tall, slender spire going up, and at the other end, of course, the Royal Hotel. So we've managed to bucket that up by putting the 1970s house we've lost the idea of the vista. It's a great architectural disaster. Well, disaster is an understatement, but it compromises the view. Planners in the 1970s didn't seem to worry too much about it. And again, another shot. So that's the view today, with that 1970s house. I mean, great if you live there and you've got this lovely view along the boulevard, but in terms of appreciating what it should be, we've just compromised it to the point of spoiling that vista. Price was instrumental in designing all of the boulevard. That's the commercial, the public, and the private housing as well. So the entire street is his work, including the Mercury office, this row of shops and offices. In fact, his own office was here. And on the whole, it's not been messed about with. Okay, the shop fronts are not necessarily as well designed as they should be, but they in the fullness of time, they could always be changed. They're only shop fronts. But the buildings themselves are still intact. And again, the whole point of look up, and that's where you'll see the quality. Oh, it's interesting, isn't it, that the building he designed for a local newspaper is still in use as the headquarters of a local newspaper. I mean, how many banks still have their original buildings? How many post offices are in grand public buildings any longer? They're not, are they? They're trendy wine bars. And here's the Mercury office, 1885. Next door, what I still call a boat shop. It's funeral parlour now, isn't it? 1888. So it is said that Price based his design on Saragossa Cathedral. So it's in the Spanish Baroque, and there's a photograph of Saragossa Cathedral. Here's a photograph of the Western Mercury. If you can actually see the obvious link, then you're cleverer than I can't quite. It's if somebody gave me that photograph and said, can you work out where the inspiration for this came from? Well, no. But just because I know it's Saragossa, I put a photograph of Saragossa. But it's, to me, this is a bit more Portuguese. This is Manuelian Portuguese. But hey ho, this is Price at his exuberant best. What on earth is this there for? It's a newspaper office. Why do you need those? Are people going out with bows and arrows to fire at the angry residents who are writing nasty letters to the Mercury? But it's fun.
Is it protected? Is it?
Yes, yes, they're listed. Yeah, and it's in a conservation area. And yeah, look at this. This is pure Portuguese Manuelian. It's a wonderful. It's a wonderful bit of architecture. And I know the Mercury family loves it. But these are the sorts of buildings which I feel a bit of supple nighttime floodlighting really pick them out. And just along the road, how many people look up at this particular saint who's got a shovel? Why has he got a shovel? Because he's Saint Fiacre, who was the patron saint of gardeners, and this used to be the greengrocer shop. So the owner put him in there. He's also the patron saint of hemorrhoids. You're a doctor. Can you deal with them better than he can?
I suspect.
Quite what the link is between gardening and piles, and I'm not sure. But anyhow, there he is, and there he is still there. And again, you could do a little floodlight from across the road, just picking this out. After the field street, we could get rid of street lights and just use borrowed lights from buildings that we floodlit, and it would look so much nicer. And across the road, Hans Philip Price built the Masonic Hall. This is what it looked like, the Masonic Lodge of St. Kew, with this wonderful Bavarian timber top, which I certainly remember. It was taken away in 1981 because the timber was rotting, and today we would say, no, don't take it away, replace it. Great picture. And it's St. Kew's Lodge. Don't ask me why, I'm not a mason, but it's the Lodge of St. Kew. So St. Kew is there. St. Kew from Kewstoke. There he is, blessing the crowds or masons as they walk past and come in for their pints of beer, whatever masons do. So there is St. Kew, still there, but not floodlit, and so most people don't even notice it. But again, this wonderful sort of Elizabethan frontage to the door, and looking just around the corner down the boulevard to the vista of Christchurch Spire. Handsome buildings. Across the road, Price also built the St John's Church Institute, which for years had been the church hall of St John's Parish Church, and built 1881. But in 1983, the parochial church council decided they no longer needed the entire building, and so they converted the upper section to their church hall, and in order to finance it, they removed this rather nice sort of Oxbridge College lower level and put in that awful shopping front that we now have, which is a totally nondescript thing. So from a very handsome building, we now end up with something which is handsome above, but down below is not. And that's the doorway. That doorway is still there. And that's the doorway. And if you didn't know this was in Weston, and you looked at that, you would say, oh yeah, well, which Oxbridge College is that? And how good it is that on either side there, we're told it was built in 1881, but rebuilt 1983. I'm all in favour of putting these little architectural bits in that, as you're walking past, oh yeah, that tells me either who built it, what the name is, or what date it was built at. useful. But a handsome facade, again, I suspect bypassed by most people. That's where you go for somewhere to go. It's that hallway in. And the boulevard itself, it was a residential terrace, 1870s residential terrace, and there are two bits of the original garden wall still in existence. One in front of the Constitutional Club, and the other one at the far end, in front of a building which I think is a beauty parlour or something before you get to Longton Grove. The next road, by the traffic lights. So these were houses with small front gardens opening onto the boulevard, and three-storey houses. Of course, it's nobody's fault. As towns grow, so the residential bits of the centre tend to be converted into retail. And now we're in an age when the reverse is happening. Some of the retail areas are turning back into being residential. So it's a funny old world, isn't it? We change and then we go back, we change again. So all the way along here, it's entirely retail, with some residential still above. But it raises the whole question, what if all of that were to become residential, and people living in the town centre who don't necessarily want cars, but you wouldn't want them if you live there. And it's still retained its barge boarding. I'm told, that I've never seen any proof of it, but I'm told Weston has more barge boarding than any other town in the country. It's amazing the variety of barge boards we have. And in the boulevard, it's all still very much intact. Okay, some of the upper windows have been messed about. That is clearly part of the original window frame, the sash. That has been messed up, hasn't it, with two rectangular bits. So it's been spoiled, that's been spoiled. That one, totally inappropriate in that the upper pane has just been slid up through. But that's, though, if you want a sash window repaired nowadays and you pay for timber that shape, it's costing. And further on Boulevard, of course, as I told you before, it's called Boulevard because Smith Pigott wanted it the Pigott Boulevard, and the commissioner said, certainly not, we're not naming after your family. So it just became Boulevard. As I said before, no French person quite understands Boulevard what. But you can see again, this eclectic style. I mean, we're moving now into the Dutch roof style. So we could be in the Netherlands along here. He plays wonderfully with these different roof styles. And you can look at all of these buildings and say they're all the same, and then you stop and look at them. Oh, no, they're not. But they do blend. He was a master at blending one style into the next, so that you think they're all the same until you actually stop and look at them, and they're not. And here's another. I mean, this is a lovely pink limestone building, isn't it? With the pink tree as well in the boulevard. Absolute beauty. And detail. I mean, he was not just an authority on style, but he was determined that all the detail would fit in. It should be appropriate, even to the point of his chimney stacks. I mean, you can see it's that pink limestone house again. Doorways. This is in Alfred Street, looking like it is it a castle. No, it's the side door into a solicitor's office. I mean, look at this. Okay, it's got this awful metal thing there because it's got to. But there, I mean, that's pure medieval Great Western Railway, isn't it? It's wonderful. But again, how many people in the boulevard? Well, nowadays nobody's looking because they're all doing this on mobiles as they walk along. Again, I suppose if you walk along looking up things, you're just as likely to bump into a lamppost. So, and this pair of houses in Gerrard Road, again, this is Price's wonderful design with the detailing, this wonderful detailing there. Again, you just wouldn't get it today. We could, but it would just cost too much. And whoever this prince is meant to be, absolutely an idea, but it's not the same as the one in the next window. Across the boulevard, he initiated the summer and winter gardens, which I mentioned last week. And this is his flamboyant entrance to the winter and summer gardens. That predates the winter gardens here. And here it was as a grand entrance. Unfortunately, bombed in the war. Not totally destroyed, it was only firebombed. It could have been restored, but we tended to take the easy way out of. It's interesting in this country, we took the easy way out, we removed buildings, we didn't want the Victorian past, we wanted to bury the past, so we started brand new, 1950s, Festival of Britain, let's go for concrete, let's go for new, let's get rid of the old. Interestingly, in Germany, in many times which we bombed, they removed the buildings, then they put up the awful things in the 1950s, as we did in the 60s, and they have often now removed those buildings to go back and restore sort of mock building as it was. You go somewhere like Hildesheim, twinned with Westbourne, which we flattened to a medieval town city, and that's being rebuilt in the old style, but in this country we don't. And that's what it is today, which is architecturally challenging, but doesn't have the style that is, or the interest of the previous. I reckon this is his pièce de résistance. It is the most wonderfully flamboyant building, the School of Science and Art, said by, in the Hans Fowler Price book, in the Nicholas Pevsner book, to be hyperactive, Jacobean, come Flemish. I've not invented that phrase, I've cribbed it. In other words, it's everything, isn't it? Hyperactive, Jacobean, come Flemish. And all of these glazed tiles were added a bit later, 1899, or towards the end of these, either that or the year after that. But as a school of art, perfect. We'll see these huge windows allow the light to come in. Remember again, we're in the days before electric lights. We've got to have a few. If you want an art school, you've got to have big windows. No, well, it doesn't matter, you just put a few more strip lights in. And I mean, look at this. This is wonderful stuff. You can take 100 photographs of this building; they'd all be different. These great beasts, the acanthus leaves, the roses. That beast is not the same as that beast. They're two different heraldic creations. The windows, the timbers fit in perfectly. Everything fits. And I just love all this detail. These things, incidentally, have stopped the wretched pigeons. And everyone is different. These are green men, but the leaves are coming out of the nostrils, the ears. And this stunningly good terracotta stuff. This was all designed by I forget his name now, but Bristol glazier and designer who added them after Price had built the structure itself. And I must congratulate the college because they restored the building beautifully. I only took these photographs 3 years ago, and it is stunningly good. He then went on to design the first of the board schools. Remember, it was either last week or the week before, I said that the Forster Act of 1870 had been passed, allowing local authorities to introduce state education. Weston was particularly behind the time. It took 20 years before we had our first state school, and that was the Waddesford Board School. Board because it was the municipal board which ran the schools. 1897. Price, along with his partner William Jane, built, and this is said to be Flemish Renaissance, that I have heard it described as Prussian. So you take a choice. It's either Prussian or it's Flemish. But again, it's this whole thing of it's the wedding cake. It's piling up one on top of the other. There is nothing boring about that because each level is is interesting in its own right. Always culminating in the price mark of the air vent, which he spent a lot of time designing, and there are quite a number of these in Weston. Unfortunately, of course, buildings like that are not well suited to modern education because of the configuration of rooms and so on. And it must be really difficult for the head of the governors, because listed building, they can't put it down, they can't muck it about too much, but it is a really handsome building. And I mean, again, look at this detail. This rather reminiscent of Bottom Street Baptist Church. You can see that style coming through again. But this sort of double arrangement here, the foundation stone there, and boys, of course, boys. Girls went to a different school, and here's this wonderful air vent, which in itself is that could be in any Italian city, couldn't it? It's really a wonderful feature. But to expect a school to have to pay to maintain an air lantern is perhaps unrealistic nowadays. Then down the road, there wasn't quite so much money when it came to designing the Locking Road schools, which later became Winstoke Girls' School, which later became Wyvern Lower School. There's now a block of rather nice flats where the playground was. It's now nice lawns and shrubbery. Two buildings, you see St Saviour's Church there, so it's built next door, 1899 and 1905. Again, with the Hans price mark on the roof, except, and you can't see it on this particular photograph, two buildings which became one school but were originally two schools. The one lantern is original, and the other one was made by Fisher and Dean, the development company, when they converted this into a block of flats. And I defy anyone to spot the difference between the original and the one they made. They're a really good local firm. They're the people who converted the old hospital in the Boulevard into flats. Fisher and Dean, really competent local firm. They were really pleased with this work. And a couple of sketches I made of the lanterns. This is Walliscote School, and that's the Locking Road School. And this, to me, this is St Petersburg. You've got this onion dome. This is an Orthodox cathedral. And again, there's Hans Price having a bit of a joke. Even on his smaller schools, this one is this is Christ Church School in Baker Street. Obviously, not that much money around, but nevertheless, and this is the seafront shelter. So culminating in the yacht, and still there on the Victorian shelter on the seafront. Again, it's the fact that he's paid such attention to detail in the full knowledge that most people aren't going to look up. But he's the designer, and he wouldn't have been satisfied unless he'd put everything into the most minute detail. He designed our first hospital, 1866, the Alfred Street Dispensary, Weston's first hospital, now converted into residential use, thanks to a former Bishop of Bath and Wells who wouldn't let the council put it down. I think I told you the story that when the hospital moved out to Uphill, they wanted to demolish all of this and build new houses. And the planners at the council said, yeah, we don't object. Civic Society objected. And then some crusty lawyer in Wells was going through some documents. If this land, because it was glebe land, if this land is no longer used for public benefit, then it reverts to the Bishop of Bath and Wells. And the bishop wonderfully said, oh, it belongs to me now. I'll allow you to convert the old hospital into residential use, but I won't allow you to pull it down and build a new. So thanks to the bishop and a crusty lawyer in Wells, these buildings were retained. So good old C&E, it saved those for us. And very handsome they are now. And across the road, he designed his warehouse. Again, the sort of thing. Compare this with the type of architecture you see in the road coming into Weston, Tin Shed Alley. The things are designed to last 20, 30 years and they're just sheds and we pull them. This has style about it. He designed the Royal West of England Sanatorium. It was a pub, it was the halfway house, it was the pub midway between Weston and Uphill, a bit of a smuggler's den. And then in 1868, part of the movement for sanatoria, where the idea was that these diseases, these chest complaints could be dealt with by fresh air. So you build sanatoria on the seafront, big windows, you open, and this is where people came to recover or to die. And if they died, well, they built a chapel. And inside there was a proper seawater bath. So you could have saltwater cures inside. And it only closed when the new hospital in Uphill arose, and planning application came in to demolish it, same thing, or at one point convert it into a motor showroom. And there were a great hue and cry over this, and in the end, the health service had to agree for its conversion, and very well converted. But of course, to make the finances stack up, they had to allow development on the rest of the estate, otherwise the finances just wouldn't work. So I think it's been quite successful there. But there you are, another Hans Price building. And again, this is the way in, that's the chapel. It looks again, that looks to me like a 19th century teacher training college. And yet it's a sanatorium, it's a hospital. And inside, the chapel is still there. It's owned by the people who live there, so conjointly owned by them, as a sort of community centre of them. But I haven't been in it, and I think all the furnishings have gone. The organ has certainly gone. And I'm told that the acoustic was really, really good. Again, it looks a bit like a 19th century college chapel. It's the sort of thing that turns us at the university when we were young. Well, we were all young, but years ago. Then the town hall. Back to Manners and Gill, the people who were designing Christ Church. They designed an earlier church, the second Anglican church in Weston, Emmanuel, next door to the town hall. The town hall, which had been designed by James Wilson. James Wilson was from Bath. He designed not just the town hall, but also the new St Nicholas Church in Uphill, which he copied from his design for St Stephen's Lansdowne Hill in Bath. That's a much bigger version of the one in Uphill. He also built the big house on the hill for Miss Brooke, the Villa Rosa. So we're getting these sort of well-known local architects, local Bristol, Bath, Weston, and then Price comes in to extend it. So in 1897, he builds the new campanile and this facade, and that's as it is today. Except that, of course, as legislation gets more complex and local authorities need to have more office space, that has been surrounded by a later addition. So here's the Price bit, the town hall clock, this new facade, and just in case you don't know, it's a town hall, it's a proper carved sign saying town hall, as opposed to these painted things we put up nowadays. It's again to do with self-confidence, isn't it? If you carve your name in stone, you're confident. If you just paint a sign, because you know in 2 years' time it'll disappear, then you don't have that self-confidence. And this was the era of civic dignity and pride. We're rather wary of pride now. We're a bit worried by it. And then it was extended by the same company, but by then it had become Fry Patterson and Jones. In what was called the 1927 Post Office Georgian style. So you can see Price's original has been wrapped around by this later classical design. So it's a bit of a mishmash. It's various bits of architecture, but again, that's the way English buildings tend to evolve. He then passes back down the boulevard and designs the public library. Now, I put Wilde question mark because I see more of Wilde's style in that than I do of Hans Price. But Hans Price is the boss, so it all goes out under his name. And that's the library with a much later extension, which never, look at that, they didn't quite finish it as he wanted it. They ran out of money. And it often happens with the project. You build part of it, you don't have enough money to finish it, you hope you're going to finish it 10 years hence, but you can't, and the building costs become higher, so you cut down the style and you finish it with something that's a bit cheaper, so that bit gets a bit cheaper. Interesting facade, because on the front, again, all of these wonderful carvings by a chap called Harry Hems from Exeter, who was a great ecclesiastical carver, and he created the pulpit in Emmanuel Church, but all of this carving, fine carving, and the muses, and you can see these are from Greek mythology, the various arts, science, art, literature, wine. They're a bit discoloured now, the soot on the stone. I know the building's just been sold again. I'd rather like to see those washed and brought back into full visual prominence. They are rather fine. But this is Harry Hems' pulpit in Emmanuel Church, which is a stunning piece of marble. It is such an enormous work of art. And there it is in this town centre church. Most people, I'm sure, don't appreciate its beauty. Price also designed the new post office. The post office, which is no longer there, in Post Office Lane, which ended its life here. But in fact, this is what it was like when it was designed. A handsome brick building by Price, but I can definitely see his assistant's hand in that as well. And another communication building, the Telegraph Office in Richmond Street. This is Sydney Miles. That now is the what's it called, Bear Grylls in Richmond Street there. But this was the most important communication link between England and North America. The cable came from here across to Ireland, under the Atlantic, and popped up on the other side of the pond. And this is where all of the telegraph messages were Morse coded across to America, all from this little building in West. And the telegraph office emblem is there. This new building, but this part of it now is covered in, looks like wood from packing cases and just nailed on the great pity. But there we are. And there it is. And just across the road on one of the shelters, before you get to the sea, is that emblem. And that, of course, is the cable. It's still there on the building. And some of us, I mean, for as old as I am, some of us will remember a post out in the channel with a triangle on it, which showed where the cable was underground before it went off to America. And I think the post had we no longer send Morse code messages. And his final work was what is now the museum, but was the Gaslight workshops and offices. Well, he was by then a very old man, and I doubt he actually designed this at all. This was William Jane. But it's under the name of his company, and it is his last commission. So we like to think of the museum as it is his, even though I suspect it's actually William Jane's. He was also a director of the gas company, so he designed his own building. So a handsome building, and how appropriate that it is in use today as the museum. He did work on Burnbeck Pier, The pier burnt down at one point. I mean, it's quite a tradition for Western buildings to burn down. And he designed the clock tower, the north lifeboat house, and the south lifeboat house. So the north lifeboat still there, clock tower sort of there. But as for well, I put those buildings with nice sun in the hope that perhaps, who knows.
Yep.
A clock tower, it's all but gone. He designed the Pier Master's house, which is still there. And obviously, since I took that photograph, the North Jetty has become a little more kinked than it was supposed to be. And he designed this. This is Clarence Park. This was King Edward VII or George V's colonies. I can't remember which. But that's the gate lodge, or the park keeper's lodge, into Clarence Park. Still there, and again, that's very much in the Hans Price style. He also designed these public buildings. There's this wonderful row in High Street North, known as Somerset House, all the way around. You can see they didn't quite have enough money to finish it in the same style. So this bit going up to the Britannia is in brick. They ran out of money, didn't have enough to finish it off with that nice cloth. So look at this stunningly beautiful detailing. And we know it's Somerset House because it says so up there. Okay, we've lost the middle bit of it. Of course, that's where the Playhouse Theatre is. You remember I told you it burned down. But again, look at that quality. That is still there. It's beautiful stuff. And the rest of that terrace leading right up to the YMCA building. Just look, I mean, this is Venice. These terrific window formations, Venetian windows are the triple window. Looking here along through Old Post Office Lane, from Warren Street, Old Post Office, and then you get this view. And again, you showed that picture to anyone here. There's where's that? Western Supermare, High Street. The Shaftesbury Hotel. Okay, that's not there anymore. That's where it is. Let's go back. Shaftesbury Hotel. Look at it there, and look at it now. He designed the Magdala buildings. Again, the sweep all. Again, most people just look at this ground floor where the shop designs are pretty ropey, but the upper stories, by a relatively cheap option of getting all of those shop fronts redesigned, you could have the most wonderful facade. The detailing is these are modern photographs. The detailing is still there. And look at this lovely little balcony. Wouldn't that make a delightful apartment? You'd come out there and address the crowd, isn't it? And then the big houses in Weston. They started, I mean, we know the big estates, Villa Rose and so on. Gradually, as the century moved on, we started to build the smaller villas, but still big by today's standards. And then we started designing the semi-detached villas. Again, as economies change, so building style changes. But this is the Grove Park Road area of the 1890s. Again, this mixture of style, Tudor and Gothic. South Road, Cecil Road, these villas, not quite so much money, but again, by today's standards, these are hugely good quality properties. And one of these rather eccentric, but the chalet, which most people don't see because you have to be going there in order to actually see the house, it's tucked up on South Road, designed by Price, but designed for Wooler, in what is described as a quote, fancy dress Bavarian. And the chalet, beautiful. You build on the hill overlooking the bay, and there it is in West. I mean, people in Bristol and Bath, show them these properties. Where's that? Weston's isn't there. And here in Upper Church Road, this Moorish building. Look at these windows. They're straight out of the Knights of Arabia, aren't they? Even here, the detailed tiling on the gateposts, it's still there. It is pure Muslim architecture. Wonderful stuff. It's said that Price had been off to North Africa on a jaunt, came back with lots of ideas, and built this pair of houses above Grove Park. And that's the detailing. I mean, the fact that it's still in somebody's gate pillar, that's a work of art. That is stunningly good stuff. Beautiful. But they weren't just into the grand architecture. Weston was expanding in all social areas, and here in Wooler Road, Price built in what's said to be the new town, these working class cottages. It's interesting, isn't it? These were built as working class cottages, and yet you go into them today, they are big houses. I mean, compared with the houses we buy now out near the motorway, they're tiny compared with and these were working class houses. So, Glebe Road. I suppose somebody coming into the street taking a photograph, a big camera on a tripod, black hood over. No wonder the kids are just, what's going on there? And the photographer must have told them to stand still. Yeah, don't move, whatever you do. And again, this is the same road. The detailing is still there. And I love this in Baker Street. This juxtaposition of these different buildings. You can tell Baker Street Post Office. Okay, the post office has gone, the window has gone, and it's now in residential use. This has gone from what used to be a glaziers, it's now flats again. But this they've attempted here, even though these are UPVC windows, they've gone for the same style as the old timber sash. So from a distance, that fits. Use of colour. I mean, that pink really makes it sound. That's fun. That's good. This is rather out of Weston, but just to show the Price was doing work elsewhere. The Royal Hotel Pier in Clevedon, which has just been restored in the last couple of years. This is a wonderful bit of Price work. I just throw that in. And at the back of it, modern extension. Just showing again, you can put modern work onto old work, and providing it's architecturally well designed, it works. And I think that's over. This is Street from here, so you're overlooking the sea with this very modern back to his. That's the front of it, and that's the back of it. And when he died, they simply popped him over the wall into Milton Road Cemetery, which is where he lies, looking across at the church where he was church warden for half a century. So, back to that point, we have our colours, the grey carboniferous and the pink carboniferous, the honey-coloured Ulitic limestone, Bathstone. Remember, we were only able to start using that after 1841, when the railway had been built. Otherwise, how would we got stone here? Local brick, local tiles, in the soft red, plus of course the Welsh slate, which initially came across by boat and then by railway. So it's these colours, these are the colours of Weston. Grey, pink, soft red, dark grey. And that sums up what the Civic Society used to say the stone town. That's Weston. And this shows, this was a bit of the walling in Weston. The garden walls were often built by the apprentices. So the houses were built by the masons, the apprentices learned how to build them. And of course it's the garden walls which are falling down everywhere. I mean, my garden wall, how it stands, I don't know. And each year I keep thinking, I must try to put some more mortar in there, and then I forget. But this wall in Hill Road was taken down and rebuilt. best part of a year to do it. So really good. It just shows how it should be done. The limestone and the mortar in, not standing proud. One or two people now seem to think that the whole point of a wall is to look at the mortar. Well, it isn't. It's to look at the stone. Mortar should be pushed in. But there we are. Beautiful, beautiful work. Here in Gerrard Road, a house has just been restored. You can see here they were in the process of restoring it. It's been beautifully done. Along the seafront, the Victoria, Albert and Prince's buildings, 3 rows going from the thatched cottage right up to Marine Lake, 3 separate terraces. They were all built 2-storey as houses, but houses with sufficient room to rent out. So the people who came to visit, they weren't hotels to start with, they were residential homes with accommodation space. That's the way in this sort of pre-hotel era things work. Interestingly, these were built 1838 to 43 all the way along. The railway didn't arrive till 1841, so Weston was already on the map. What's happened, of course, subsequently is they've gone up a storey, they've come out a storey, and the gardens have gone under tarmac, except this end building, which stays proudly in residential use, no commercial use whatsoever. And so it gives you a taste of what the entire terrace would have been like, all the way up to Knightstone, to Marine Lake. Oriel Terrace, this was the frenetic era of building. Once the railway was here, I mean, Weston just took off, building everywhere. James Wilson again comes in and designs Oriel Terrace in this Jacobean style. Again, beautifully restored here, recently done. I've got great attention to that detail, as opposed to the other end where some pretty hideous chap who exists has for years been knocking about. There was a big court case which the council lost, so they can't stop him. Anyhow, around the corner, in opposite the college, is in South Terrace. Again, this rather nice little smaller terrace, but you can get see the whole point. A grand one, of course, is Royal Crescent, 1847. This is Bath, isn't it? This is definitely emulating Bath. This is Weston saying, oh, okay, we can do it just as well, and we'll build in Bath stone. And in recent years, rather beautifully restored, even to the point where, since I took that photograph, the chimney pots, albeit mock, have been put back on top of that stack, so it looks correct. Greenfield Place. So you have Royal Crescent, Park Place, Greenfield Place, and in between what is now the Melrose car park, but that was the private shrubbery of the people whose homes surrounded it. If you couldn't afford your own private estate, you could afford one commune. So you gathered your property owners around, and then the parkland in front, you could pretend it was your estate. In fact, you were a sharer of the estate with the other. That was a very Victorian way of doing things. It was an English concept, and this is Greenfield Place on the left side. And that painting of it by John Hickley in his wonderful book, Looking Up Weston. Great thing an artist can do as opposed to a photographer. I mean, that's my photograph, but you can't get a proper perspective. If you're an architect, if you're an artist, as John is, you can get rid of all the other stuff and just paint the terrace. And if you want his book, they've got copies in the museum. It's a joy to look at. It really, really is. The other crescents, Claremont Crescent. Interesting, you see the horse and carriage there. The road up here became too steep for horses. You can imagine a shod horse trying to... So they had to extend the road up a slightly less inclined. Hence the road that goes up by the side of Burndeck Pier is known as Burkitt Road. That specifically for horses to be able to pull the carriages up. So Claremont Crescent, odd in that you can't quite work out which is the front of it. These are the front doors, but the best views, of course, are on the other side, back where the sea is. And that's it today. These pineapples were made at Western Pottery. They've largely gone, but it would be the easiest thing in the world to make them in modern material and just put them all back again. Again, look at this wonderful detail. This one was in the backyard of Dornsis Hotel, but that's no longer a hotel, so where it's gone I don't know. Made in Western Pottery. And that's the back, or is it the front, of the crescent. You can see the original roof line, very much mucked up by that awful British Legion lift shaft, but of course that's no longer the British Legion house. And the hotel, as we know here, 1807 to 10, extended then here by this company, Gabriel and Hurst, in 1849, who also built the Grosvenor Terrace there. So this, the Royal Terrace, is also by the same company. This side still has that French chateau roof. Unfortunately, that one was taken down. Well, you see, taken down some years ago and flattened. Okay, I've mucked up this photograph because I've paint-brushed the college out of it. I found that offensive, so I removed it. And Manila Crescent, Henry Lloyd, who built Holy Trinity Church and Atlantic Terraces, 1851, Manila Crescent, a charming crescent, except again, you know, the rooftop nonsense we went through in the 60s and 70s. But it's a handsome terrace. I mean, just look at this detailing. And generally, I don't like freestone painted, but this has seaside quality to it. And of course, Edinburgh Crescent, built by Moffat, 1855. It's part of this great building era, isn't it? And probably the most outrageous of all must be the Atlantic Terraces. And Hefner is very rude about it. More confidence than judgment, Italianate. I think he's being rather rude, but it is really, really powerful stuff. Except again, oh God, these awful things in the roof. But there we are. They are. It's on the grand scale. I mean, these were 5-storey houses. Not one of them now is a house, of course. They're all flats. And some starting to see restoration. I mean, here's a really good entrance to one of them, clearly restored with great care and at some cost. Smaller terraces in Montpellier, the bottom of Montpellier, again a handsome, and you can see it needs either not to be painted, or once you have painted, it's the devil's own job to get rid of it. So you could paint it entirely in one colour, or you could paint each one so vividly different that they all stand out. But that's somehow not quite, in terms of colour, worked out what it should be. But it's a handsome little terrace at the bottom of Montpellier. And I think 3 of them are still single. Slightly up there, the south side, what I call ecclesiastical Gothic. But I can never quite work out. They must have run out of money, because here they use brick instead of stone. It's almost as though they're halfway through building it. Oh God, we can't quite afford the stone, let's finish it off with brick. Then, of course, Henry Butt comes along and buys the terrace. So he puts on his 1920s bit at the side, but does it in a style that makes it look as though it's part of that. Henry Butt was a good extender and converter. You know, he who designed all the mansions on the hillside. Bristol Road Lower, if you, just opposite the YMCA, you look at this terrace and you think, got it all. It's all sort of bottom end of the market, bed sits and curtains never open and all sorts of drug problems there. And yet the potential, it's a really handsome crescent as it goes from the end of High Street up towards into Bristol Road. On the hill, well, if you could afford it, you had your great mansions, and here is Miss Brooks' house, the Villa Rosa, which was taken down and is now the Villa Rosa block of flats. That's the block of flats, and all that's left is the stable behind it, which is the Villa Rosetta. Beautiful, beautiful building. When you consider that was just the stable block for this mansion, and of course her bridge to go from her estate across to her apricot garden, so that she didn't have to mix with the hoi polloi in the road below. And then the private water supply, which they had in the shrubbery. The water tank is still there up there, but that's now a private house. The other big mansions on the hill, gradually the shrubbery estate is just 4 mansions to start with. This is another of them, Overcombe, and that's now gone. And these are that's still there. And then along South Road, these big, sometimes Gothic, sometimes Italianate mansions, stunningly big houses. This in Eastfield Park, or the nursing home now. But you can see the lifestyle that would have existed. I always liked these little turrets. I always imagined myself as a boy, that'd be my bedroom, so I could out in there. And in South Road again, there's ecclesiastical emphasis in the Gothic style there. This is Eastfield Park. This is where Henry Butt died. This is his family house. And I mentioned the shrubbery and the way in which the Melrose car park was the private sort of garden for people who lived around it. Here is the last of 2 private gardens for the people who live around. This one is Wilton Gardens, next door to the town hall. And most people in Weston have never been in there. They've never even walked around that little square, because why would they? Because it doesn't go anywhere other than come back out onto Wapping Road. But that was created for people who lived around it, who couldn't afford to have decent front gardens. So they could have this one front garden. You see these in London, of course. Now, whether this is owned by all the people or owned by, I don't know what state it is now, but you go to Eastfield Park, and certainly all the people who live in Eastfield Park have the right to use the grounds, and nobody else does. And up on the hillside, Prince Consort Gardens in the Elizabethan style, these villas, 1844, handsome buildings. Landerman Circus, going up into Queen's Road, and as the shrubbery developed, gradually plots of land were sold off and they became smaller houses, semi-detached houses, even terraced houses, and eccentric. I mean, this one, I think, in going up just the bridges just around there, there's Villa Rosa. It's such a mixture of styles. And Atlantic Road South, again, the size is getting smaller, they're becoming semi-detached, but by today's standards, they're still enormous. And just to make sure the riffraff doesn't come up into your area, you build gate lodges, and then this the Victoria Hotel behind Smith's. Again, this sort of Great Western Railway Gothic, and gate pillars. Again, this to me signifies confidence. This is my estate. An Englishman's home is his castle, something. Therefore, I'm going to build a damn great wall with really big gate pillars to tell people this is who I am. I have succeeded in life. This is my castle, albeit a semi-dig. And these are wonderful statements of power, as opposed to nowadays, we put up a bit of interwoven fencing. This is in South Road. I mean, this is straight out of Switzerland, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful. And again, back down onto the lower land. If you don't have a view, best property prices are up there. Down here, value is not quite as high as up there. But even so, around the park, because you've got the view onto the park, the properties are still substantial. Repeat that. And as time moves on, as we move to the end of the 19th century, so land values change, people's income changes, staff are no longer as easily employed, domestic staff that is, and so houses get smaller and becomes a bit more suburban. But here you still see that overall concept of design. St Paul's Road, Severn Road, and Morland Road. Commercial buildings, banks, one of those great statements about success. No self-respecting bank would operate in buildings that we now have for banks. They had to make a powerful statement. A powerful architectural statement meant you had arrived. And nobody wanted to invest their money in a bank that hadn't arrived. So banks competed in their architectural styles one way or another. That was the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, HSBC, this is Lloyd's, Lloyd's post-war, National Westminster Bank, and even depositories for your furniture. This wonderful bit of French mansard roofing, beautiful, just to go and leave your furniture. But you knew they would look after it because they had a decent building. Again, here in the boulevard, people have replaced their windows with UPVC. So again, in terms of style, it can work, even if you're a purist. I try to be, and timber sash is a bit difficult to maintain. That at least has kept the transoms where they should be. And here, Berry Redmond Gordon, the solicitors in the boulevard, they've attempted, again with modern material, to replicate the original. If they've not been able to do it properly, there we are. And here, I mean, in Alfred Street, this road, which is, I forget which company has it, but it's for young people who are just moving from home but don't have the experience in life to actually run their own homes, so they go here for a short time. And again, it's been done really, really well, as opposed to, so, yeah, there is always a right way and a wrong way to do it. Look at this in Locking Road as a way to extend your route. I mean, that is just slipshod and dreadful. And, this sort of stuff. It's, the 60s and 70s were not good decades in England for appreciating architecture. And yes, modern stuff up on the hillside, it can, that blends in perfectly with the hill. Here, Roselle House, I think, was an attempt to be modern, yet Art Deco-ish. Modern extensions behind the old hospital, blended. How sensible to have 3-storey properties, where land is expensive, so you've got your entrance and garage there, and your house above. Sensible use of space. These wonderful cottagey post-First World War council houses at Milltown. We built the first council houses in England after the First War. Homes fit for heroes, and I mean they're wonderfully cottagey, aren't they? It's George Street, built in the 1870s, wonderful potential. Hopkins Street, Grove Road, again in this sort of English arts and crafts style. And the use of colour, this is in the town centre. I'll whip through these now because I've just got a few minutes. Using colour in the town centre, it's almost Chelsea-fying in terms of exuberance and colour to the town. And I love this Art Deco house just around the corner from the railway station. I think it's stunningly good. And the restoration of the centre buildings with this is the canopy which has been lost. I just played around with colour, and that's what it should be if at some stage we could get it restored, as opposed to, well, and yet in the past year they've just painted it and cleaned it up, and so they've done the best they can with what was not particularly pleasant. And this, of course, we all know has changed. That's what desired. But shop fronts, if we want the town centre shops to attract people, they've got to look attractive. Otherwise, it's become the same as anywhere else, and we'll all stay online and order our things without going anywhere near a shop. But things which are quirky and different, and that's what we need. In Big Lamp Corner, you look up at the roofs, they're fascinating. There's great potential here, even though we tend to be a bit disparaging when we talk about places. Museum, of course, location, it's been wonderfully restored. Okay, the outlook on that isn't particularly good, it could change. And we all know what's happening here, the planning application for the Royal Hotel. If it hasn't been approved yet, it will be in the next few days, because nobody's yet objected. So this is going to be this was the original plan, it's not the final plan, but we're going to see development. And this will be looking out from here across there as all of this comes to fruition. And then this will be the rest of Dolphin Square leading to the seafront, which will become modern, high-rise residential developments of people living in the town centre with views across the...
Is that happening?
This will happen. Yeah. That's not the plan. That's a design idea. No plans yet exist. That's the concept rather than the actual plan. And so we come to the end. Western, we can see either in the summer with all it's the seaside, whether the sea is in or not is immaterial, it's still the seaside. In the summer, all enjoying ourselves. In the winter, equally enjoying ourselves, so that we can look positively ever forward to the future. And there we are. Just done it in time. End of the 5 lectures. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Very nice. You can go home now. I hope you've all enjoyed the. I'm afraid once I get started, I just go on and on. And they say, sure, 8:30. You don't read the right. I know. I have become a very, very competent philosopher. My friend who's doing it is doing the skimming. I'm not.
Yeah, we don't need to skim on the garden.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Just shove it in.
Yeah.
Well, that's the place, isn't it? I used to live in that. In 2014, I visited the Castle Green Hotel in Kendal.
Yes.
And then embraced me right there.
Let me see. Okay. Yeah. Find out.
Yeah, you go from one time I went it's now 60 miles school.
Your photograph? 60. Okay. Thank you.
So I sent it to the duty manager.
Yeah.
And just email back off saying that they've refurbished another 2 rooms, so it costs £90,000. Please let me know next time you make plans today, and I'll do my best to make sure you are allocated one of these.
Wonderful.